In the backyard of a quiet suburb, a daughter stumbled upon a grisly discovery. Her mother's naked body lying on the damp ground. Blood trailed toward the porch. The shock gave way to a scream, which alerted neighbors and sparked one of the most grisly investigations in the area. The murdered woman, Linda Harper, lived in a small house in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town. She was 42 years old, worked at a local pharmacy, and was raising two children, a daughter, Jenna, who was 17, and a son, Michael, a 10-year-old schoolgirl. Linda had been divorced for several years. Her ex-husband lived in a neighboring state and rarely visited the children. Neighbors described her as a quiet, friendly woman who avoided conflict and lived a private life. In recent months, Linda tried to pay more attention to her children. She often worked late and spent weekends doing housework. She didn't have much of a social circle. Aside from her colleagues at the pharmacy and a few neighbors, she was rarely seen in the company of anyone else. Jenna noted that her mother was tense and often locked the doors, even when she was home. The last day of her life didn't foreshadow any trouble. In the morning, Linda took her son to school and then went to work. She behaved normally with her colleagues, smiling at customers and discussing mundane matters. According to co-workers, Linda left around 7 in the evening, saying she needed to stop by the store. That same evening, she called her daughter and asked her to stay with a friend, explaining that she wanted to be home alone. When Jenna returned home around 10 p.m., the door was locked. The lights were out. She went into the yard to check the back door. There, in the darkness, her gaze fell on a motionless figure lying on the ground. She turned on her phone's flashlight and saw her mother, naked, arms outstretched, covered in blood. Shock paralyzed her for seconds, after which she screamed and ran to the neighbors. Neighbors called the police, and within minutes the first patrol arrived. Officers immediately cordoned off the scene and called in an investigative team. According to them, Linda's body was in an unnatural position, with signs of a struggle. Blood stains led from the back porch to the spot where she was found, indicating she had been moved. Police immediately began documenting the situation. Photographers captured every corner of the yard, and forensic experts recovered blood samples and tissue fragments found in the grass. Muddy boot prints found on the porch did not belong to any family member. While forensic experts worked on the scene, neighbors huddled in a small group, observing the scene. They shared their theories. Some spoke of possible revenge by the ex-husband, others of a random attack. But the scene itself pointed to a more complex situation. The crime bore signs not only of cruelty, but also of humiliation. Linda's children were sent to live with relatives, and the investigation officially began. In the first hours, investigators weren't ruling out any theory, from robbery to murder stemming from a personal relationship. However, even from the start, it became clear that this would be a complex and high-profile case for the local police. The immediate hours after the body's discovery proved crucial to the entire investigation. Patrol officers arrived in Harper's yard minutes after a neighbor's call. Their first task was to ensure there was no threat to others and to confirm the attacker was not nearby. A search of the area revealed no one was in the yard, but footprints on the ground indicated a struggle had occurred there. Linda Harper's body was located near the back porch. Officers' initial observations indicated she died violently. Her posture indicated she may have been dragged after the attack. Numerous abrasions and bruises were present on her skin, and bloodstains on the grass indicated she had been moved. Police noted an important detail. There were no signs of foul play at the scene. All valuables in the house were still there, ruling out a robbery motive in favor of a more personal crime. Forensic experts arrived half an hour later. They immediately cordoned off the yard with special tape, prohibiting neighbors and even family members from approaching. Every detail was meticulously recorded. Shoe prints on the porch, scratches on the doorknob, fragments of fabric in the grass. One particular shoe print drew particular attention. A large, distinct impression that matched neither the neighbor's shoes nor the family's belongings. Investigators simultaneously began interviewing witnesses. The first to be questioned was Jenna, the victim's daughter, who had discovered the body. She was in shock and her testimony was inconsistent, but she provided key details. Her mother had called her that evening and asked her to stay at a friend's house, and when she returned, the house was locked and the lights were out. Jenna claimed she hadn't heard any suspicious sounds while at her friend's house. Neighbors also testified. A family living across the street reported hearing noises around 9 p.m., similar to an argument or shouting, but dismissed it as unrelated. Another neighbor reported seeing a shadowy figure at the gate of Harper's house around the same time, but was unable to describe the figure due to the darkness. The officers also recorded the condition of the house itself. The interior was undisturbed. The furniture was in place, and the windows and doors were intact. However, the back door had a damaged lock, suggesting an attempted break-in. Importantly, the front door was locked, and Linda had the keys, suggesting the perpetrator either entered through the back or the victim let him in. No murder weapon was found during the initial examination. This became one of the first tasks, determining what had caused the fatal injury. A forensic examination was scheduled for the following morning. The body was transported to the morgue for an autopsy. At the same time, police officers checked nearby surveillance cameras. Several houses in the area had security systems, and officers requested access to the recordings. Within the first few hours, it was established that an unknown man had indeed passed near Harper's home at approximately 8:45 p.m. The camera captured his silhouette, but the quality of the footage was insufficient to make out his face. The investigation rapidly gained momentum. The police understood that such cases generate significant public outcry. Journalists were already at the house the next morning, and neighbors were actively discussing the incident. Local authorities emphasized that they would make every effort to solve the crime. The key theories put forward during the first 24 hours boiled down to 3. The murder could have been connected to personal animosity, the victim's romantic relationship, or someone's revenge. The robbery theory was ultimately dismissed, as not a single valuable item was stolen. The initial police efforts yielded important evidence that would later prove decisive. But even then, it was clear the case would not be straightforward. The perpetrator had acted covertly, left minimal traces, and may have known the victim. The morning after the body was discovered, forensic experts began a comprehensive investigation. The first step was a forensic autopsy. The report confirmed Linda Harper's death was violent. The cause of death was multiple blows to the head and signs of strangulation. Experts noted that the blows were inflicted with great force, and that the perpetrator then used a rope or belt. This indicated an intention to finish the job, rather than a casual altercation. Forensic experts carefully documented all the injuries on the body. Signs of a struggle, abrasions and bruises, were found on the hands and forearms, indicating Linda had tried to defend herself. Skin and tissue fragments were found under the victim's fingernails, raising hopes for DNA testing. Footprints on the ground near the back door became a key clue. One shoe print was quite distinct. Experts determined it belonged to a men's shoe, size 44. Police contacted shoe stores around the city to check for recent purchases of a similar model, but the process proved labor-intensive. Several items were also seized from the house for examination. A mug with coffee residue on it stood on the kitchen table, and fingerprints found on it did not belong to Linda or her children. This fact immediately became a key focus of the investigation. CCTV footage completed the picture. One of them showed a tall man in a dark jacket moving near Harper's house around 8:45 p.m. He walked quickly and glanced back several times. The camera didn't capture his face due to poor lighting. However, the presence of a stranger near the crime scene coincided with the presumed moment of the attack. Investigators began to identify suspects. Their first target was Linda's ex-husband. He had ground for conflict, long-standing disagreements over child custody and financial support. However, his alibi quickly proved correct. He was in another state that night and communicating with colleagues, as confirmed by surveillance footage and witnesses. The police then checked neighbors and family acquaintances. Several men who had occasionally interacted with Linda came to their attention. One of them, a work colleague, was questioned first. He denied being at her home on the day of the murder, but investigators found his testimony incomplete. The investigation of his phone number and movements continued for several days. Of particular interest was the fact that Linda had been complaining to her daughter in recent months about feeling like she was being watched. She said she sometimes felt someone's presence near the house, noticed a shadow outside the window, or an open gate, although she insisted she had closed it herself. These statements became the basis for the theory about a possible stalker. The police expanded their investigation, focusing on people close to Linda. One neighbor recalled seeing a car parked near her house several times, but it didn't belong to her or her relatives. He didn't have time to write down the license plate, but described it as a dark sedan. This added another avenue to the search. A key element in the investigation was the analysis of DNA samples found under the victim's fingernails. The lab confirmed the presence of male skin cells, which did not match any relatives. Cross-referencing with the database yielded a preliminary result, a match with a man previously convicted of assault. This discovery significantly accelerated the case, but required thorough verification. The investigation knew there was insufficient evidence for an arrest. However, within the first few weeks, a theory had developed. The killer knew Linda and could have entered the house either by coercion or force. He had attempted to act covertly, but had left biological traces and fingerprints. The next task was to confirm the suspect's identity and establish a motive. The investigation was entering a more active phase. Each new piece of evidence allowed the search to be narrowed, but a definitive indictment remained a long way off. After DNA testing revealed a match with a man with a history of criminal inconvenience, the investigation focused on a specific individual. He turned out to be a 38-year-old man named Robert Miller, who lived a few blocks from Linda Harper's home. Robert was known to police for a number of minor offenses. Several years ago, he was arrested for assaulting a woman in a bar, but the case never went to trial due to the victim's refusal to testify. His past included episodes of aggressive behavior, alcohol abuse, and short-term employment. He changed jobs frequently and never held any one job for long. Miller's connection to Linda wasn't immediately obvious. Investigators discovered that he had visited the pharmacy where she worked several times. Linda's colleagues noted that he sometimes stayed longer than usual, struck up conversations with her, and was persistent. Linda herself once mentioned him to her daughter, saying that one customer was being too persistent. She didn't think much of it at the time, but now the detail has taken on new significance. Police began investigating his alibi for the day of the murder. Robert claimed he was home that evening watching television. However, neighbors reported that his car was not visible near the house at the time of the crime. Furthermore, a nearby surveillance camera captured a dark sedan similar to Miller's. Investigators soon obtained a search warrant for his home. During the search, they found boots matching the footprints found near Harper's house. An examination confirmed the sole pattern matched. Furthermore, forensic experts found traces of blood on a jacket hanging in the closet that DNA matched Linda's. This became one of the most compelling pieces of evidence. Miller's biography revealed that he grew up in a dysfunctional family. His father was an alcoholic, and his mother died when Robert was 10. His childhood was marked by constant quarrels and violence. Already in his teens, he was arrested by the police for theft and disorderly conduct. After school, he worked as a laborer, periodically moving from city to city without a steady income. The suspect's personal relationships were unsuccessful. His ex-partner stated that Robert was quick-tempered and often aggressive. Her testimony indicated that he could control and intimidate his partners. Police considered this information as part of their personality profile. Taken together, all the collected evidence indicated that Miller had both the opportunity and the inclination to commit the crime. His attention to Linda in the pharmacy, the lack of a confirmed alibi, the matching shoe prints, and the biological evidence found strengthened the investigation's case. Despite this, Robert himself denied involvement. During questioning, he acted confidently, claiming he had not been at Linda's house that evening and had nothing to do with her death. His testimony contradicted the evidence found, and investigators knew they would have to prove in court not only his connection to the crime scene, but also his motive. The theory that Miller was stalking Linda and trying to establish contact with her gradually became the dominant theory. It became clear to the investigators that he was an intrusive client, showed an unhealthy interest in the woman, and at some point resorted to violence. Thus, at the end of the 4th week of the investigation, the police had a prime suspect, a man with a criminal past, an aggressive character, and direct evidence linking him to the murder scene. When forensic evidence conclusively linked Robert Miller to the crime scene, police obtained a warrant for his arrest. The arrest took place early in the morning to eliminate any possibility of resistance. Miller was alone in Miller's home. According to officers, he attempted to remain calm, but became visibly nervous when his rights were read to him and the reason for his arrest was explained. After being brought to the station, the interrogations began. Investigators presented him with evidence after evidence: bloodstains on his jacket, matching shoes, fingerprints on a mug from Harper's house. Miller denied everything, claiming the police had framed him and that the jacket could have been stained accidentally. He insisted he was home on the day of the murder, but there was no one to confirm this. There were no witnesses to his presence. The court-appointed defense attorney attempted to argue that the evidence was circumstantial, but the prosecution already had a solid case. In addition to the physical evidence, experts presented DNA testing results matching the samples found under Linda Harper's fingernails. This fact cast doubt on any defense the suspect could offer. The trial began 8 months after her arrest. The case generated widespread interest in the city. Journalists covered every day of the proceedings, and local residents discussed the details. Linda's relatives, colleagues, and neighbors were present in the courtroom. At the hearing, the prosecutor's office laid out a chronology of events. According to the prosecution, Miller had been obsessively interested in Linda for several weeks, stalking her, and that evening, seizing the opportunity to enter the house. His motives remained unclear, but investigators insisted it was a crime motivated by obsession. The defense attempted to challenge the credibility of the evidence. The lawyer argued that the bloodstains on the jacket could have appeared earlier, and that the mug with the fingerprints did not prove anyone had been in the house on the day of the murder. He also tried to point out to the jury the lack of witnesses who saw the attack. However, the expert testimony and forensic findings proved decisive. The forensic expert described the nature of the injuries in detail and confirmed that Linda's body bore signs of a struggle. He called Miller's DNA under the victim's fingernails indisputable evidence of contact during conflict. An additional factor was the testimony of Miller's former partner, who was called as a witness. She described his aggressive behavior, outbursts of rage, and controlling tendencies. Her testimony reinforced the image of Miller as a person capable of violence. The trial lasted several weeks. The parties presented all their materials, and the jury heard dozens of witnesses. The atmosphere in court was tense. The victim's relatives insisted on the maximum sentence, while the defense attorneys tried to soften the defendant's image. After a lengthy hearing, the jury retired to deliberate. The verdict was clear: guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced Robert Miller to life imprisonment without parole. For Linda's family, this decision was a significant milestone. Although the loss was irreparable, justice had prevailed in the eyes of the public. For the city, the trial became an example of how even a carefully concealed crime can be solved through consistent investigation and forensic work. Linda Harper's case ended with Robert Miller receiving a life sentence. For her family, this was a sign of justice, but the tragedy left a deep mark. The community long discussed the case, which demonstrated how a hidden obsession can lead to brutal crime.